is a video to attempt to get you caught up on what you missed on February 12th, 2019, for the second part of the period. So, first part of the period, we went over some notes, look at the calendar, and make sure that you take those notes. Then we had our category of historical fiction novels. Well, okay. And you got to pick which category yesterday that you were most interested in, and I'm making those groups. And tomorrow you're going to get put in your groups, and you're going to start reading your first book in the unit. And so tomorrow you're going to be reading chapter 1. So earlier we went over character and conflict and setting, because those are the kind of things we're going to be talking about. My first book, the teachers, 7th grade teachers, our category is the Vietnam War, which was not one of your choices, but that's what we're doing. And so I'm going to be doing that using the Vietnam War and books from the Vietnam War, and just like I did The Outsiders when we did the companion books. So then today, I kind of modeled that with using the book Patrol. Now, it's a picture book. It's not a novel, but it'll get the point across. So one of the things was you need to have a reading notebook. Of course, you wouldn't have that today, so I just had you take notes in your journaling side of your composition book, and just asked you to write down 2 questions. What kind of person is the protagonist? And what is happening in this story? So as we read what would be chapter 1 of this book, we're going to look at what kind of clues. And so the lesson is really read closely. Look at the clues. Understand, what's going on in the story. I gave some background of my own as far as what I knew about the Vietnam War, and I think that knowing a lot about it helped me understand and helped me kind of read into maybe what this character is thinking, because I knew a lot about the background. But that's one of the things we're going to be doing in this unit, is some background work on the era that you're learning about. Excuse me. All right. So read with me with those 2 questions in mind. What kind of person is the character, is the protagonist, and what is happening in the story in regard to conflict and setting? The land of my enemy has wide valleys, mountains that stretch along the far horizon, rushing brown rivers, and thick green forests. My squad of 9 are in the forest. Above me, birds twitter nervously in the treetops. Insects and small animals scurry through the underbrush to avoid the crush of my combat boots. The squad leader raises his hand. We stop. The sound of my breath is soft in the morning air. Somewhere in the forest, hidden in the shadows, is the enemy. He knows I have come to kill him. He waits for me. Okay, so stop for a second and jot down, just based on that, what kind of person do we think this main character is? And what's going on? So before we even opened the book, we knew that it was about Vietnam. And I made a judgment just on the illustrations, because the front of the book, he just looks really young. But that's also a little bit about what I know about Vietnam and the draft. But the things that we noticed in class were that he starts off, he's telling the story, and he's saying, the land of my enemy. So, you have an enemy that you're fighting against right away. But then he doesn't describe what he sees. Some people said, he's very descriptive, he's very observant. But he's not saying, this is a terrifying place. He's like, it has wide valleys, mountains that stretch along far horizon, rushing brown rivers, and thick green forests. He pays attention to the birds and the insects and small animals, like it's a beautiful place. He could have described it as terrifying and horrible, and he didn't. And the first time there's something that's like, is trying to avoid the crush of my combat boots. And so it brings you back to, he's wearing combat boots, he's there for combat, and I think it's just kind of jarring, because you hear all this beautiful stuff, and the birds and the animals, and the crush of my combat boots. And some people notice too that that this kind of says he's the danger. we know that he's in war, and it starts off with the valley of my enemy, or the land of my enemies. But this first thing is almost like he's the danger. He's the one wearing combat boots. He's the one that could crush small animals. The squad leader raises his hand. We stop. The sound of my breath is soft in the morning air. Somewhere in the forest, hidden in the shadows, is the enemy. He knows I have come to kill him, and he waits for me. So you're brought back into this is a pretty horrible situation. This is war that's happening here. Okay. Listen and jot down. The squad leader signals, and the patrol moves out again. The brush thickens as we head toward our target. The fog, which rolls slowly at the edge of the forest, is beginning to clear. I lift my rifle and begin to rub the palm of my hand slowly along its wooden stock. The weather is hot, but the sweat that runs down my back feels cold. Shots, a firefight. I dive to the ground. My heart beats faster. I lift my rifle and fire into the green forest. Bullets sing and whine over my head. I empty my clip, sending more bullets into the trees, the bushes. In reply, the bark flies from a tree near my head. I think I see the enemy. I reload and shoot again. It is only a shadow, but I do not stop shooting. In war, shadows are enemies too. Suddenly there's silence. We're afraid to move. We're afraid not to move. So stop and jot down. What more do you know about what kind of person this character is? And what is this situation? So things that people shared here are that he seems to know what he's doing. He dropped down immediately. He knows to shoot. But then the little clues, like he's still kind of talking about, he has a target, like he's there to do a job. He's going to do the job. He's trained well. He knows what he's doing. But then just like to rub the palm of my hand slowly along the wooden stalk. Someone brought up that maybe that's a comforting kind of a thing, like, okay, this is my protector. I'm going to be okay. And the sweat that runs down his back feels cold. That could be symbolic of something. But as soon as there's fire, right, he dives to the ground. He knows what he has to do. He doesn't hesitate to fire. And then this part, I reload and shoot again. It's only a shadow, but I do not stop shooting. In war, shadows are enemies too. And then we're afraid to move, but we're more afraid not to move. And so some of the things that came up were that, he is scared, but he knows what he's doing. Some people said, maybe this means that he was paranoid and just freaking out because he's just shooting into the shadows. But at the same time, in war, shadows are enemies too, makes me think maybe instead of being scared, he's scarred by war. He's seen where he didn't shoot at the shadows, and then an enemy emerged from the shadows. So that's a possibility. And the fact that we're afraid to do anything. He's handling everything very well, but he is afraid. I hear the sounds of the birds again and wonder if they speak of us from the high branches. I wonder if what they see makes them sad. I am so afraid. I want the enemy to be more afraid. I want him to tremble more than I tremble. The radio crackles in my hand as I call for bombs. Crouched against a tree older than my grandfather, I imagine the enemy crouching against a tree older than his grandfather. We wait. We wait. Images of those I love come to mind. So stop and jot. What about his thoughts give you some insight into who he is and what kind of person he is? And sometimes it helps to go back and reread for yourself. So things that were shared were, I wonder if what they see makes them sad. Like he's He's even thinking about just the birds and the trees and the fact that he doesn't want what's happening to be happening. He says again that he's afraid, but he wants his enemy to be more afraid. He wants him to tremble more than I tremble. So he's also seeing that enemy as a person. He knows that maybe they're afraid and they're trembling like he is. And then, but he's taking care of the business of being a soldier at the same time. And he's hoping that they're more afraid than him. And so some people said, that's him kind of empathizing with the enemy. They're just like me. And other people said, no, he's kind of going, I don't have to be afraid because they're just kids. They're just like I am. They're not bigger than me. They're not some more advanced thing than I am. And then this one, the fact that the author said, against a tree older than my grandfather. Like, who describes a tree like that, But the fact that he brings grandfather into it. And then I imagine the enemy crouching against a tree older than his grandfather. So my enemy also has a grandfather, and then I think of those I love. And so in that case, it seems like he's really kind of, maybe empathizing, or at least he's acknowledging that the enemy is, similar. So he's called in the bombs, and we talked a little bit too about how in war they know exactly where they are. They've got maps, they've got coordinates. They have to communicate with each other very, very precisely. If they're going to call to have someone, bomb near them, they have to be able to see the enemy, be close enough to see where the enemy is and far enough away to not get bombed themselves, and then communicate all of that really clearly. And then we kind of talked about how, let me read this part first. Still we wait. Then we're startled by the sounds of the planes. We look up at them and see their shadows spreading over the valley's edge toward us. They pass us and do their work. The bombs explode, rumbling like thunder, at a distance that is never distant enough. And the fact that, is it sad to see that? Because you know that people are dying down there. Or is he relieved because it's the enemy and that protects him? Or is it both? And to be the person who has to take all that in and maybe feel both those feelings. What does that kind of give us some insight into, maybe as the story progresses, what else, what about experiencing that might build up the character? Okay, my body shakes. I tell myself that I will not die on this bright day. Against the horizon, columns of blue-gray smoke rise. 2 clicks away, we talked about how a click is a kilometer, and that's less than a mile, so 2 clicks is less than 2 miles away. 2 clicks away, there are flashes of gunfire. 2 clicks is the distance of my enemy. My chest tightens. I wipe my sweaty palms. I bite back my tears. So he's very close to his enemy. Jot down, his feelings, and what does that tell us about him? I know that he's shaking, his chest is tightening. That could be fear, that could be just, I'm going to have to follow through with my job as a soldier, and I hate that. Same with sweaty palms. I bite back my tears. Is it also emotion of fear, or is it an emotion of sadness? And then the other questions that we had, so that would be the end of, essentially like the end of our chapter 1. And we've learned a lot. We've learned a lot about the character. We've learned a lot about the conflict. We've learned a lot about the setting. And it's going to help us really understand what happens as we go forward. And sometimes in a novel, that's not all in chapter 1. Of course, that can be revealed. More and more is going to be revealed as you read. But usually by the end of chapter 1, you have a sense of of the characters, the main character, and what's going on. So in this story, given what you know so far about the character and the setting and the conflict, do you think he belongs here? How yes and how no? Things that came up in class were, well, he's definitely trained. He knows what he's doing. He's going to do the job that it takes, so he does belong there. And on the other hand, he doesn't seem like a war machine. He doesn't have anger And so maybe he doesn't belong in a war situation because he doesn't have anger, and he maybe has a lot of fear. Like, a lot of those kinds of conversations happened. So what do you think? Does he belong here? If so, you know, what makes you think he does belong here? What makes you think he doesn't belong here? And it might be both. And then a prediction. If he comes face to face with his enemy, what will he decide to do? Based on what you know about him, what decision is he going to make? So we'll stop there. Tomorrow you get your books, and you'll read your chapter 1 and do kind of the same thing.